At launch, Ghost Recon Breakpoint was busted and kinda boring. It got written off by a bunch of people, and rightly so. But what if I told you in the 5 years since release, it has become one of the best Ghost Recon games of all time and an excellent open world game?
Hello, and welcome to Gamespot No Hud, the show where we take a look at some of your favorite games and tweak the settings just enough to create a brand new experience. Today, we're taking a look at Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and we're gonna turn this into the tactical, tense shooter that we all wanted. Now, this is gonna be a tough mission, so we've recruited Deef, Ghost Recon expert, to guide us along the way.
Breakpoint built upon 2017's Ghost Recon Wildlands as another open-world Ghost Recon game. However, instead of refining its co-op sandbox and the tactical opportunities it presented, Breakpoint buried those core ideas under a loot-based shooter with color-coded loot, gear scores, and even raids. Yes, they put raids in a Ghost Recon game. While the moment-to-moment gameplay was nearly identical to Wildlands, the loot grind not only compromised the identity of Ghost Recon, but also poisoned the entire experience for many. The pitch was a tactical shooter with survival mechanics, some of which were interesting, others of which felt underdeveloped. The delivery, however, was an underwhelming Ghost Recon game that abandoned its tactical roots in favor of chasing trends with a poorly implemented live service model. It was a disaster from top to bottom, but this is a redemption story. So how do we turn this mess into one of the best tactical shooters on the market? We'll take you through the process to show you how. We'll be incorporating tweaks and new features that Ubisoft's own patches introduced before taking matters into our own hands with a mod that is going to rework the experience significantly. And we'll have Deef explain what the impact of this is. Thankfully, Ubisoft did some of the heavy lifting back in 2020 when it introduced something called Ghost Experience Parameters. Yes, it's really called Ghost Experience Parameters. This update allowed players to hop in the settings menu and rebalance the entire game in a matter of seconds. More importantly, you can even turn off the terrible gear score and loot system altogether, which we're gonna do right now. I've got nothing against loot systems. I've played my fair share of Destiny, and they can offer a rewarding loop, but they don't belong in a Ghost Recon game. What elite operative is constantly changing their clothes and tossing away equipment for new ones that incrementally make them feel more powerful? None. The answer is none.
So where do we go from here? Well, this is where Deef comes in. He's put in over 600 hours in Breakpoint, and he doesn't just play this game, he makes it sing.
It has to be extreme. I have the tactical difficulty put up to elite, and the interface, the whole HUD, is pretty much nothing. I don't have anything up except for the objective that I'm going to. Just because if I don't have guided mode on, I will go on a tangent and I will get lost. It's pretty much bare bones, zero HUD, and just a little bit of guidance from the game.
Well, this show is called No HUD, so I guess it makes sense just to turn basically everything off.
Like Deef said, the only thing I'm going to leave on are the objective markers so I don't get lost or distracted. However, when watching Deef's gameplay, I did notice one important HUD element missing: reticles.
Yeah, no crosshair, which was a learning experience, but I feel like the more I play it, I'm looking for more and more of a challenge and to be more immersed. And yeah, a crosshair was breaking the immersion for me a little bit, so I got rid of it.
This may seem daunting, even a bit absurd for a third-person shooter with over-the-shoulder aiming, but Breakpoint provides you with the tools to overcome this. The obvious choice is to turn off over-the-shoulder aiming altogether. This means that aiming will default to iron sights and scopes. If you prefer the over-the-shoulder style of aiming, you can track down a laser sight. That said, if you've never played Breakpoint before, I don't recommend turning everything off right out of the gate. Now, the gameplay experience will be predominantly defined by the tactical difficulty menu. Here you can tweak a wide range of settings that can fundamentally change the game. The biggest example of this is gear score, which we've already turned off. While Deef said he doesn't typically play Breakpoint like a survival game, he does set the tactical difficulty to elite, at least as a starting point. This means bandages are limited, risk of injury is set to always, stamina consumption is extreme, health does not regenerate, and ammo is lost on reloads. Additionally, syringes don't heal injuries. If that wasn't enough, Darkest Night mode is also turned on, meaning visibility is reduced at night. This hopefully will force us to use our night vision goggles more.
Okay, let's pause here for just 1 second. I need to emphasize that we're not trying to make Ghost Recon Breakpoint as hard as possible. Instead, we're trying to make it the most tense tactical shooter it can possibly be.
Of course, for some people, the fun is in making the overall experience more punishing. But for others, these settings promote that thoughtful playstyle. It's all about finding your sweet spot. So when you fire up Breakpoint to revisit it, I suggest you play around with these parameters and see what fits your playstyle. Some of these settings even lean more to the survival aspect that gives more purpose to some of Breakpoint's more extraneous mechanics, like drinking water and cooking. Now, a key component of every good tactical shooter is difficulty and enemy AI. Enemies should be aggressive, responsive, and deadly. This forces you to play smart and think multiple steps ahead. If the AI lacks in any of these areas, the gameplay can devolve into a super soldier shooting gallery, which isn't the Ghost Recon way. The best tactical shooters reward careful planning as much as quick judgment calls, and unfortunately, even on Breakpoint's harder difficulties, you can rip through enemies and outposts without giving it much of a second thought. There's not a lot of risk unless you are severely underprepared. Thankfully, the Ghost Recon community has already addressed this issue with the Spartan mode mod.
One of the coolest things it does is it beefs up the perception of the enemy AI, which I think that a lot of people who have played on Extreme for long enough will complain that the AI don't really respond as much as they should to things going on around them.
This mod isn't technically a new difficulty mode. The modder who goes by Vandar describes it as a rebalancing that tweaks enemy behavior. This mod also makes it particularly difficult to take down a base during the daytime, which makes sense since they'll have better visibility during the day. Vandar recommends setting the enemy difficulty to the second hardest difficulty, Advance, rather than the hardest, Elite. Given the AI's improved awareness, Elite can be particularly brutal, borderlining on unfair. When you load up Breakpoint after making all of these changes, it feels like a very different game, and in a sense, it is. The minimal HUD forces you to pay more attention to your surroundings and listen for nearby threats. The inability to mark enemies requires you to keep a mental map of the area. Information typically available to the player is stripped away so that the intel gathering and strategic considerations that define the Ghost Recon experience return to the foreground. It's impossible to know how many foes are patrolling a point of interest unless you do some actual Ghost Recon. Even the topography, time of day, and weather needs to be considered when you play this way. Mountain ranges can give you better sight lines to gather information and pick off stray enemies if you have the range, while valleys could leave you exposed and in a precarious position. Time of day, especially with Darkest Night mode enabled, as well as weather, can also significantly hinder your visibility, which could be used to your advantage if you take a stealthy approach, or a detriment if you allow the mission to devolve into an all-out uncontrolled firefight. Reconnaissance and careful coordination pays off in dividends when playing this way. Planning and orchestrating a successful attack based on your own intel that you had to uncover yourself is incredibly satisfying. It slows down the overall pace of the game, but it makes encounters feel more meaningful throughout. That said, I do think turning off the HUD wholesale can be pretty off-putting, especially for those that may not be familiar with all of Ghost Recon's mechanics. Without pickup markers, you probably won't be able to tell loot from environmental dressing, and without a detection indicator, it can be very hard to tell where an enemy spots you from. Thankfully, nearly every little HUD detail can be customized. I suggest starting with light or minimal interface presets and then customize from there as you get more comfortable. At the very least, I'd turn off the health bar, ammo counter, and minimap. The red vignette makes it pretty obvious when you're low on health, and your character will limp if they are injured. If you leave objective markers and waypoints on, however, you can get by without the minimap entirely. If you're playing co-op though, you may want to leave the compass on. With a minimal HUD, this makes coordination more intense as it forces you and your buddies to accurately call out cardinal directions rather than relying on red blips. While chatting with Deef, one thing he said stuck out to me.
The ability to be methodical, be tactical, just kind of living out the fantasy of being, a special spec ops agent. I feel like Ghost Recon lets you explore these opportunities with your imagination a bit more. It's interesting that we have that option to express a bit more of our preferences are our own identity within Breakpoint.
I think what's most surprising is that with all these settings, whether intentional or not, elevate Breakpoint beyond an open world tactical shooter. It almost scratches a role-playing itch that I never expected in a game like Ghost Recon. Sure, there's different classes and skill trees, but by the end, I had unintentionally created a backstory and personality for my character that informed my playstyle. It's rare to see this kind of flexibility when it comes to modern game design, but in the case of Ghost Recon Breakpoint, it recontextualizes the entire experience. And therein lies the beauty of Breakpoint and also the point of No Hud. This show is about finding new and interesting ways to play games. Ghost Recon Breakpoint players were dealt a bad hand when the game was released, but with the changes we've suggested, you can lay all its cards on the table, rearrange them, and play with a deck of your own creation.
Ghost Recon Breakpoint is more than just a pretty island with guns. It's a sandbox brimming with possibility. And honestly, the more I think about it, I think it's safe to say that Ghost Recon Breakpoint earns the Tom Clancy Ghost Recon name. Thanks again for checking out this episode of No Hud. If there's games you'd like to see us cover in the future, make sure to let us know in the comments below. And hey, while you're down there, let me know how you play Ghost Recon Breakpoint. I'd love to know. I'll see you next time.